What can you do if you're caught up in Facebook's latest massive privacy breach? And how is the government considering changing the laws around social media? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. Hi there. Welcome to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading tech journalists each week to dive into the big tech stories. I'm Adam Turner, and this week I'm not joined as always by Alex Kidman, a man who's taken a roster week off to plan his new social media platform, Teapot, focusing on the end of the world and obscure goodies references. While Alex contemplates the teachings of the mysterious TBT, this week the virtual Vertical Hold studio has been taken over by the 9Facts Mafia. First up, we've got my fellow tech writer at The Age and Sydney Morning Herald, Peter Wells. Peter, welcome back to the show.
Oh, why, thank you, Adam.
And also joining us is our editor at The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald tech section, Tim Biggs. Tim, also welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
So it's been a big week in social media as the federal government contemplates new rules about how we can use it. But first up, there's been another massive Facebook data breach. But the social media giant's trying to tell us that it's all old news. Tim, what's the story here?
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird one. So most headlines over the past week have made a big deal of the scale of this data leak that appeared online through several hacker forums. And it is quite big. There are more than 500 million entries, so that's personal data on more than 500 million people worldwide, which is huge. But in a practical sense, the data is almost solely phone numbers with names attached. So it's quite a bit less serious than, say, leaked passwords or credit card information or something like that. Still could potentially be used for crime, of course, and not a good look for Facebook, but not a catastrophe either.
So were they hacked? Like did this data get out?
Yeah, so it wasn't a hack in the sense that someone would have like broken into Facebook's servers or like got past the defenses or sort of got hashed passwords and decrypted them or anything. It's more it's what it looks like, because obviously there hasn't been a whole lot of information from Facebook. But what it looks like is at some point in 2019. Someone or a group of people made a piece of software that basically abused the way Facebook worked to get this information. So Facebook, I'm not sure if they still have a thing. It definitely works differently now than it did in 2019. But the way it worked was it would upload your contacts from your phone and then check those phone numbers against the phone numbers listed publicly by Facebook users. So it could say, here's your friends, they're on Facebook. So what this software would have done is it would have tried every single possible phone number, seen the profiles that came up, and then matched that phone number with that person's ID. So it would have said, okay, we've put in this number, this is the person's name, possibly this is the person's email address. And so then they ended up with a huge database of people that they knew their names and their phone numbers of.
So Peter, what would someone want to do with this kind of data?
Well, it's the same thing that Facebook wants with this data. It's the ability to cross-reference people and see, and create that kind of social graph, which is what powers Facebook's ad tech and what makes them a hell of a lot of money, is being able to see, that you and I are friends on certain platforms and we have similar hobbies, and then break that down and turn that into a data set of what is, a white guy from Melbourne who digs tech way too much into that I can advertise against him. It's that kind of stuff. And Facebook has been really coy about this whole thing. Like, the stories have been going on for at least a week now, and Facebook's response has changed over time as to what they said has been found. And it's kind of, they're admitting more and more as they're being forced to admit more and more, because people are screenshotting from Telegram where this hack or this breach has been, the data set is in Telegram and being shared in that platform. and they are finding things like your a lot of your birthdays and the birthdays of all the people that you know and everything else is also tied up into this data set. So what exactly has been taken is it's one of those situations where, unfortunately, for the end user, what the hell can you do? If it was just a simple password breach like Tim was talking about, then great, change your password and make sure you don't use that password anywhere else. But you can't change your phone number, you can't change your date of birth, you can't change, what your location history that has been stolen as well. So I don't know what to do here.
I'm always surprised at how freely people give away their birthdays because, as you say, that's the one that you can't do a factory reset on your birthday. You can't go and change it.
Mm.
I often lie and say my birthday is the 1st of January 1970, which is the beginning of the Linux clock. My father-in-law would have thought that was very cool. But that's like the default thing. I like, you don't need to know my birthday. And that makes me a little bit older than I actually am. So you're not going to say, oh, you're not old enough to use this service. And like Facebook doesn't tell everybody when it's my birthday because that's a really sensitive piece of information. Do you think that people are slowly starting to become more aware that some of these things, like your birthday and other things that we happily throw around, and perhaps we need to treat a bit more carefully?
I think so. Well, I mean, the information's already out there, and I think people. It doesn't really matter if people are kind of becoming wise to it now. We've given this data to all of these companies over the last decade, and maybe we're starting to regret that now. But what will change is legislation that demands that these companies just kind of delete that data, but because they're not going to do it by themselves, it's far too valuable.
So, Tim, do you think that, and I know this is a ridiculous question to ask in some way, but are people losing trust in Facebook? Can the trust go into negative territory?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I've seen any solid data on that, but I'm going to assume that Facebook's reputation for trustworthiness is already extremely low. It's simply that they run an operation that people don't feel they can do without. There are aspects of Facebook's operation that people really rely on, for things like event planning or even for keeping track of people's birthdays, which obviously they don't do for you, Adam. They send you, greetings on the totally wrong day. But there are certain things that people have come to rely on over the years, and the fact that they're all in that one place makes it very, difficult, or at least makes it seem very difficult for people to want to go and find an alternative. And there's something to be said also for the fact that it's become such a habitual thing for people even to just scroll through it and just look through it. The idea of deleting all your data and getting rid of the app, which you can do if you want to, I think seems to some people just not an option. So even though Facebook, has repeatedly shown it's perhaps not to be trusted with data or with our patronage, they've sort of got themselves in a really good spot in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, I can't stand the company, and I still have an account because we use Facebook Messenger for Kids, which is a good product. I've got to say, it's a good product. It's well thought out, and I hate every second I'm in it. But yeah, what are you going to do? They're just too big.
The fact that this happened in 2019, does that mean that Facebook's sort of swept this under the carpet for a while and it's only just coming out now?
I believe that it was reported at the time.
It was,
but the data wasn't publicly available. So it had been scraped, and they knew that someone had it. But for the last couple of years, that would have been held privately, or it would have been sold around, or it would have been used in the way that Peter suggested of analysis. And then eventually, it gets sold around so much that it's basically out in the open. So they just dump it.
And so that's why they're trying to claim it's old news.
Yeah, Facebook's been almost aggressive, I would say, with its response to this. The original response was, this is old data from 2019 and we fixed the problem. And that was basically it. And then the second one was just like, I guess some people don't really get it. So we're going to come out and say exactly what happened, like for you idiots who want to know what happened. And it was just like this really strange sort of, explanation. But yeah, their whole response has been of someone who's irritated that people are annoyed by this.
But that's kind of par for the course when, as the media dealing with Facebook, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a we don't need to be dealing with this kind of attitude, which obviously, and they know that they do need to be dealing with it, but I think it's part of the messaging to to not give anything up and not kind of admit that you failed in a responsibility here.
And to be honest, I mean, no one really, like you said, no one's leaving. So they've just posted their record, yet another record quarter. So I guess they're in that point where they just think, well, look, people are going to get over this, like they got over it in 2019 when it first came out. So just keep your mouth shut and move on.
Australia's very big at talking about throwing around regulations we want to slap on, huge tech giants, whether or not it's actually practical. And there's a few that we're going to talk about in a minute. But around this one, do you see potential things that the government or the ACCC might want to put forward in terms of data retention, and would it actually work?
I mean, it would be complicated. I feel like they're already going somewhat to that direction, but I'm sure Facebook would say that this was data that A, was held to make their platforms work, and B, was listed publicly by the users. So it's the case where when I'm setting up my account, I might put in my phone number and I might put in my date of birth and my email address or whatever, and that's information that I'm volunteering for the purposes of Facebook to share it with people. There's no other reason that I'm giving it up. It's so that it can power things like my friends being able to find me when they have my phone number, or my friends knowing when my birthday is. So from Facebook's perspective, they'd say, this is something that was given voluntary. We explained what it was going to be used for, and that's all we used it for. It's not our fault if someone finds a way to get that stuff that has been posted publicly. And that's basically what they said. I think the exact thing they said was, accessing data in this way and scraping is against our policies, which is like, whoa, okay, it's against your policies. So,
well, that sorts it then. So that's great. Good. It won't happen again. Yeah.
But it's the kind of thing that I think would be hard to legislate against unless you basically made it illegal for Facebook to do Facebook things, which I don't see happening.
That could win votes,
yeah,
in certain circles. So, Peter, are they on the back end? They've saying they've made changes. Can developers do things to make it harder for people to do this kind of scraping?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it would be like Tim said, hashing the data so that even if you can scrape the data, you'd need separate keys to be able to understand what that data was. And then that's what they've said they've done. They said that this bug was kind of around for about 3 months in 2019. And so that's when all of the data was scraped. So they figured it out. They patched that hole. But yeah, Facebook is a crazily difficult service to maintain and operate. With the amount of data that is in there, it's always going to be such a honeypot for people to go looking for this stuff. And so they're always going to have the best security on the internet, and it's going to fall down every now and again.
So speaking of how people use social media, the government's come up with yet another great idea, because they have so many of them, another great idea of how to keep us safe online. They're proposing to force Australians to have to present 100 points of ID in order to get a social media account. So basically the same way you would go to the post office and hand over all your ID to get a physical passport. Peter, is this going to work? Is this a crazy idea?
Yes and yes. I think it is a bit of a crazy idea, but I really like it. I really do think that there is just too. I don't know. There's something about social media that really brings out the worst in people, and part of that is the anonymity that goes along with it. And so I've thought for years Twitter would be a much better service if you just had to pay like $1 a year or $1 a month to access it. That would cut down so many of the bots, so many of the trolls, and just make for a better experience. And I think that's a better way for the companies to do it, to go for a subscription route that upfront tells people that, look, this is a service that we expect a certain amount of of decent behavior in here. Discord is doing that, actually, and Discord has been very successful in the way it has moderated the forums that it supports. So I think there's absolutely something to be said for forcing a real name and account into social media. Yeah, look, I mean, if this was coming directly from Scott Morrison or Peter Dutton's desk, I might be a little bit more concerned than I am. But because it's coming from Julie Inman Grant of the E-Safety Commission, I really appreciate some of the public statements she said. I think we talked about this last time, that she went out of her way to say that the e-safety laws are not going to prevent sex workers from advertising online. And that's something that, like, I appreciate that purely because it is something that a lot of other people, a lot of politicians would just never comment on, because that is probably not a vote winner to say, hey, yes, I'm pro sex work. But because she said it, she was saying, look, we understand some of these issues that come up, and we want to be able to make sure that everyone, that no one is negatively affected by these changes. So she seems to understand what the hell she's talking about. I'm just worried when her report makes it to the chamber full of people who have no understanding about tech, what they're going to do with that legislation.
So, Tim, based on the track record of what they've done and proposed in the past, how do you reckon it might play out?
Well, yeah, I'm not super optimistic, to be honest. Look, I agree partially with what Peter's saying, and obviously there's a problem with the fact that most of our public discussions are on social media. I mean, it strips important debates of all context and of all nuance, and it prioritizes, the loudest and dumbest and most incendiary of voices constantly. It encourages dogmas and echo chambers and intolerances and hostilities, and then people go out into the real world and they think that that's the way it works, when actually we need more nuance, not less. But I think the idea that you would have to show your driver's license or passport to sign up for a Facebook account doesn't really solve that problem. Putting aside the practical issues of implementing it, which are not insubstantial, and the absolutely dire prospect of me giving my ID to Facebook to store somewhere, the focus really has to be on addressing the cause of people's behavior, I think, not just making them trackable. Like, I totally agree that the e-safety commissioner knows what she's talking about, and in the past she's talked about how anonymity isn't necessarily an evil, and it's often something that people choose for reasons other than that they're dodgy operators. There's lots of reasons people want to be anonymous online, and sort of there needs to be a balance there where people can be anonymous, but they can be tracked if it turns out they need to be. But as Peter said, I don't really trust the government to implement that at all. And once it's the law that you need to be trackable to use the internet, I think would be in quite a lot of trouble.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that while this is all happening, the National MP, Andrew Laming, was running 30 different Facebook pages that he didn't admit were his, where he was, trolling women online and being the most disgusting person around. So, like, look in your own backyard, buddy, before you start telling the rest of us what to do. And to Tim's point as well, when you look at the data breaches of Gab and what was the other one? The two kind of racist Twitters that popped up following Trump's ban. Parler, yeah. Gab and Parler both required driver's licenses, and both databases were hacked. And so all of that information is available freely to browse, including all of the photos, the location data. It's amazing. The Parler breach is just, if you want to talk about worst case scenario, it couldn't have happened to a nicer group of people, but it's just the worst data breach you could imagine. So yeah,
how idiotic though that because I believe that was done though just by typing into the URL, right? You could just change the number at the end and it just goes to the next picture, so they could just go along and collect literally everything they had.
Yeah, they were using WordPress as the back end for their social network.
Okay, really planning ahead there. I would think that from what you see, people show screenshots of, being trolled and stuff online. People are not afraid to say and do horrendous things when their real name is up there. Some of the stuff you see, it's like, why would you say that when it's got your name and face next to it? Horribly sexist and racist and homophobic things. So, yeah, having your real name there does not, I mean, it might stop some of the even worse things than that, but there's still some people are prepared to say and do horrible things, even when it's not that hard to figure out who they are.
Yeah, totally. I just think that when you do put a little bit more of a barrier to entry, then generally speaking, the forums or places that you hang out at tend to be nicer places. So I would love, I would love, like I said, for Twitter to do this on their end rather than kind of, forcing this kind of legislation, like to clean up your own house, and then it's crazy to me that the tech giants aren't kind of self-regulating more to avoid being regulated by governments around the world. They really should be banding together on this one and making sure that they clean their own houses so that then they're not forced, because they're not going to like the way they'll be forced.
Could Twitter treat this like another form of blue tick? This is an authorized person, and if you wanted to, you could say, I only want to engage with other people, not authorized, but verified person. But not verified as in blue tick, but verified as in they have proven they are who they are if we need to trace them down. And I want to tick a box that says, I don't want to hear from all these anonymous douchebags who pretend to be whatever from Meta. I only want to engage with people, and that would then encourage other people to do it so they could be part of the broader conversation.
Yeah, Dick Costello talked about it like 6 years ago as a feature they were going to be rolling out soon. So got all our hopes up, but never got around to doing it.
Yeah.
I think the practicality again would be a lot more sort of messy than the theory in that case, because as you say, there are a lot of people who are prepared to cause shit even if they have their own name. They would be quite happy to put their driver's license in or whatever to get their tick, and then they'd be in because they don't necessarily have a whole lot of cachet to lose. Unless the service was going to get really serious about banning people or about any kind of setbacks like that for people, and unless they were really sure of their verification methods. You don't just want the Russian bots to develop a way to make convincing looking driver's licenses, which I'm sure isn't that difficult for them to do.
I has
to
license.
get into this. Yeah,
yes.
It's something that would need to be pretty watertight, I think.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Tim. When you think of like the biggest troll of the last 5 years, Donald Trump, what he and all of his other mini Trumps online love the most is the attention. And it's killing him. It's killing him that he's sitting in Mar-a-Lago right now, Diet Coke in hand, sitting on the toilet, and he can't tweet about what's making him angry. Like, that must just be eating at his soul. And so, if Twitter just actually looked at their terms of service every now and again and imposed it and booted people off, then that could get around this whole issue as well.
But going back to what we were talking about earlier, if it's bad enough giving Facebook your date of birth and your phone number, do you really want to give them your driver's license number and scanning your passport and all that other stuff? How much do we trust them when it comes to that?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? Because if it was the government doing it and then handing out verification things, like that's bad. But if it was the platforms doing it themselves, like that's also very bad, because you don't really want Facebook in charge of that, especially if it's the case where it is your driver's license or your passport or whatever. On the one hand, like Pete was saying before, Facebook obviously handles a lot of data, has extraordinarily well protected systems, so it's not like a Parler situation where you're potentially just going to have it leaked onto the internet. The concern is that I don't think Facebook would be able to resist from doing everything it could to get every little bit of morsel of data out of anything you uploaded. And in the case of, IDs and other kinds of things that have parts of my identity that I wouldn't tell Facebook, it's a big problem.
I think the way you would approach it is you would have like an authentication middleman, someone who looks at this stuff, says, okay, I've seen Adam's driver's license, I've seen whatever. Yes, he is really who he is. Facebook, I promise you, I can authenticate for you that they are who they say they are. But Facebook, I'm not giving you a copy of Adam's driver's license or his passport.
Yeah.
And there are already services that work like that because the anti-money laundering laws and the counter-terrorism financing laws and all that kind of stuff force any kind of bank or fintech to go through the whole know your customer process where you have to have taken certain steps to check that Tim Biggs really is Tim Biggs and not some dodgy guy trying to, fund terrorism or smuggle people, whatever it is that dodgy people try to do. And there are big providers who will do this. And so I'm a bank and I want to sign up people as customers. So I sign up one of these big authentication services and they handle that for me. And I know that they were doing the right job, but I don't have to hold all that delicate information. And then because as a bank or something, I actually don't want to be holding more sensitive information than I have to because that's just more stuff that I can lose, more stuff that can get stolen or misused or whatever. So I think that's the way you would make this work as well.
Yeah, but like Tim said, the motivation here is all wrong because a bank is not targeting ads against you, so they don't need the kind of data that Facebook loves, and so yeah. I am right with Tim there that I would be terrified of giving Facebook any more data than it already has on me. And I think, I guess it would be something like a MyGov system. That's the only way I could imagine it working, where you verify yourself with MyGov and then that becomes the sign-in thing or whatever. But who the hell is going to do that? I mean, that is a bridge too far for me to post photos of my lunch. It's just, I mean, and if you look at the data, I think only 30% of people have signed up for the My Health system, which is far more important to your daily life. But that's how little trust people have in the government to protect their data and not misuse it.
You don't love MyGov? It's such a joy to use.
I use it.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Tim for joining us on the show this week.
Thanks, gents.
And as Alex is away, it falls on me to ask the big three questions. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And who's the best children's cartoon character of all time?
That would be... wait, sorry, what was the question? No, I got it. that would be the SMH and the Age. So those are pretty easy to find online. You can find me on Twitter at Tim Biggs. And what about like the cartoon version of the Toxic Avenger? That's a pretty good one.
For kids?
I was going to say,
that
if Alex was
absolutely
here,
for kids.
I wanted to vote for Krieger from Archer, but he said no because that's not a kid's cartoon. Well, let's assume that Alex said no to that, although actually he might say yes. Did you have a fallback?
I don't know. Bingo.
Yes.
Yeah,
I went Bandit last time.
And similar to Pete, thanks for joining us. You've been on the show this year already, so we'll go to the fallback question. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And what's the best sci-fi TV series of all time?
Battlestar Galactica, Peter Wells, and sometimes on the Age. You nest those answers up, and you'll get the answers to your questions.
Now that's 2 votes. It's 2 out of 2 for Battlestar Galactica. Are we talking old school or new school? Are we talking Lorne Green?
No, we're talking the Ronald D. Moore version, but only up until season 4. You just accept that season 5 didn't happen.
Okay,
they never had a plan.
Approach it. Speaking of not having a plan, thanks for joining us again on the podcast. As always, you can catch up with us online on Twitter at Vertical Hold RU or on the Vertical Hold Facebook page. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to tell your friends about us and leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice to help us spread the good word. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.